In this PowerPoint, we are going to take a look at the website project lifecycle. Now that we have learned about HTML and CSS, we're going to give that a little bit of a rest for now. And we're going to look at the more overall picture about how a website is created. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the website project lifecycle from the beginning stages. Before you even get to the code, which is the HTML and CSS, there is a bit of planning that you need to do beforehand before you start creating or developing, coding it in HTML and CSS. All right, so let's go through this process together. The steps in a website development life cycle begins with here, information gathering. So you gather the information that you need to put your website together. Then you go into planning, which is what we're going to learn about in more detail in this class. Then you go into design, also another step we're going to take in this class. Then it goes through content writing and assembly. We're going to learn about this. We're not going to quite come up with the content ourselves in this class, but it's important to know that this is the path that a web design team would take to get to the coding. So the coding is what we jumped right into in this course, the HTML and the CSS. Okay, so after you have coded your website, you have developed and made your website with HTML and CSS, then you're going to take it into testing, review, and launch. Okay, so just to reiterate, we're going to start with information gathering, putting together the information that we need to know in order to move on with our project. Then we're going to go into the planning stages. After that, design. Then we need to know about the content writing and assembly. Then only after that we go into coding, which is the HTML and CSS that we have been doing for the past month. After we have coded our site, then we go into testing, review, and launch. So what do I mean when I talk about information gathering? We have to first identify the purpose, goals, and the target audience of the website. We have to determine the requirements of the audience who is going to be using this website. Then next we determine the scope of our project. How big is this project going to be? The next stage is planning. So first we select the technology that we're going to use for our website, the programming language. We're going to use HTML, CSS. Are we going to use a CMS, which is a content management system? It's out of scope for this course that we're taking, but in INFO2106 we'll take a look at content management systems. And then we talk about the sitemap. Okay, so the sitemap is what describes the relationships between the main areas of your website. It describes the inner structure of what your website looks like, but it doesn't describe the user interface. So it looks at the different pages that your website is going to have. Next, we have a wireframe, which is a visual representation of the user's interface. So it doesn't contain any design elements like colors or logos, but it just describes the elements that are going to be added to their page, to the page and their location of it. And we're going to have more on wireframing. Okay, so the sitemap, as I mentioned, is basically a blueprint of the structure of the website. It's a hierarchical diagram that shows the information architecture of a website, a visual representations of the site's organization of the content and how different sections, how different pages are linked together. And these sections can contain other subsections. Okay, so for example, an e-commerce site, a section could be a product category, and a subpage could be a page with details for each item. Okay, so this is what a sitemap would look like. For example, you have a website with the home page, and from the home page you can go to services, technologies, contact us, portfolio, products, and about us. And under about us we have more pages, work, process, building, testimonials, blog, jobs, and under products you have enjoy, CSS, employment, and so on. So under portfolio you have more pages, and contact us you have more pages, and under services you can see that there's even more subsections here: web application, cutting edge, website development, Q&A, software testing. Okay, so it's just how the whole website is kind of structured and how pages are organized under other pages. Right, so you can use something like simple, like even just Microsoft Word to insert smart art and use a smart graphic, okay? Use a hierarchy to create a sitemap here, very easy to do. If you have experience with Illustrator and CGD 1177, you can also use Illustrator or other programs to help you create your sitemap. Next, we look at the wireframe. So what's a wireframe? It's a shell of the interface. It's screens and basic information architecture. So there's a low fidelity, which is very basic, just the very basic, most rudimentary elements that are going to be on your page. Or you have high fidelity, which is very highly detailed. Okay, so the low fidelity is a checkpoint for the product team and stakeholders, meaning people who are invested in the project at the very beginning of the design process. So they help your web teams visualize and test early concepts, requirements, design assumptions at the very beginning of the web design project, just to make sure everybody's agreeing on what needs to be on each page. So the stakeholders, designers, and developers here need to agree on the essential components and functionality. Okay, so they need to agree on the very basic elements that are going to be on each web page. Okay, so wireframe can look like this. Okay, just kind of like a very basic sketch of what's going to be on your page. So up here you have perhaps a logo up here. Then you have your navigation here, and then everybody agrees that, okay, and logo goes on this side, and then you have links here. And then you're going to have the social links here and maybe a search bar, or that's not a search bar, a download button here. And then on the left-hand side, you're going to have, a sidebar with more links here, maybe a secondary navigation here. You're going to have a search bar here, and the content's going to be in the middle. And then on the right-hand side, you're going to have another sidebar here. Okay, so if everybody can agree on this, then you can move forward. Notice that in the wireframe, we're not worried about the colors that are going to be used. We're not worried about the fonts that are going to be used. Okay, we're not worried about what the logo looks like. It's just like a very primary sort of like sketch, very rudimentary sketch as to what is going to be on the web page. Okay. So to create this, you could just use Microsoft Word. You can go into Insert, Shapes, and just use, rectangles or circles to create this very basic layout of your web page. Is the navigation going to be at the top? How much space roughly is it going to take up? Is it going to take up half of the, the browser page, or is it just going to be very skinny at the top? All right. Next, we look at the design. After we have the planning done, which is how are the pages going to be connected to each other, which is the sitemap. And then we have the wireframe done, which is, on each page, what's the layout, what is actually going to be on each web page. After we have those things figured out, then we move on to the design. And the design looks at page layouts, reviewing the page layouts, and then approval cycle. Okay, so what happens here in the design phase is that the client reviews the mockup and gives feedback, then the changes are made and then sent back. So this cycle kind of goes back and forth until the client is satisfied. Okay, then, and the client is not always, outside client, could be your boss or someone like that. So the design has to do with all the visual content, like the pages, the photos, the videos that's going to be created at this step. The designer creates the layout, okay? And this is called the mockup. And this is where you add the colors, the background pictures, the beautiful fonts, all the fancy stuff, all the icing on the cake, right? Where you start making the site look pretty. And this is not done in HTML or CSS. This is done in Photoshop or some other image editing software where you're not coding anything yet. You're just showing the client what you intend on making this web pages look like. So the mockup represents information structure, visualize the content, and also can demonstrate basic functionality. So mockups can contain colors, logos, and images, and so on. Okay, so here we're going to look at content writing and assembly. So this is just to know our class, our class syllabus doesn't include content writing, but it's good to know that this is part of the web design process. So what happens at this stage is that content writing and compiling usually overlaps with other stages of the website creation. Usually the person doing the content writing is not the web developer, right? There's a separate person who is specialized in writing content for the site, but this happens alongside the other phases like planning and design. Okay. So this is where you add calls to action. This is where you have a creation of catchy headlines, text editing, writing new text, and editing existing text to make it more web friendly. So the client usually undertakes to provide the website content to be ready to be migrated, moved on to the site to populate the site later on. So it's better when the website content is provided before or during the website coding, because the website is not separate of the content. Okay. Content doesn't just kind of like neatly fill this website like it's an empty container. The site needs to be built around the content. Okay, so it's just good to know that what your client or what the content provider has in mind in terms of content as you're building the website. All right, so then we move on to the coding. Only after the sitemap is done, the wireframe is done, the mockups are done, and the content is ready. Then you move into coding, and the coding is what you've been learning so far. This brings us to the HTML and the CSS, right? This is now where you can start creating the website, looking at the sitemap, looking at the wireframe that you're provided, looking at the Photoshop mock-up that you're provided. Then you start creating the website. Okay, so here you can use graphic elements that have been designed during the previous stages. Usually the home page is created first and all the pages are added. Okay, you start with the home page, just like with the Saffron site, you start with the home page first, and you create the other pages according to the website hierarchy that was previously created in the form of a sitemap. So when you use CMS for site creation, you can also install CMS plugins at this stage if there's a need. So here I'm talking about something that we haven't learned in this course, which is CMS. CMS is another way, a different way to create a website. Right now we are hand coding our website. There's another way we can create it where we use a CMS, okay? But this is not in our course. All right, so after the website has been created, then this is where you take it to testing, review, and launch. So every single link should be tested on your website. Every form, every script should run a spell checking software to find possible typos, things like that. Use code validators to check if your code follows the current web standards. Sometimes your website, your web pages show up normal on the web browser, even though it has errors in it. So this doesn't mean that it's okay. You have to meet standards. So sometimes you break standards, you're not meeting standards, and it still shows up okay. It means that it shows up okay today, but tomorrow or in a week or in a month or in a year, it might not work anymore. Okay, so it's important to make sure that you're following current web standards. Valid code is necessary also for cross-browser compatibility. Sometimes you write code that's not up to standard and it shows okay in Firefox, but on Chrome it might not show up at all or show incorrectly. Okay, so you have to make sure that you're following the standards not only for future compatibility, but also for cross-browser compatibility. Make sure that it will show up across all browsers. Anyways, after you have checked and rechecked your website, it's now time to upload to a server. So an FTP software is usually used for that purpose, like we've been using CyberDuck. So after you have deployed the files, you should run another final test and test it on the server, test it live to make sure that everything transferred over properly. And after you have uploaded, you're not done. There's always maintenance. There's opinion monitoring, trying to figure out what people think of your site that is now live and up. There's also regular updating. It's not enough to just deliver a website. Make sure that everything works fine, that everyone is satisfied, and be prepared to make changes, okay? The feedback system added to the site should allow you to detect possible problems that the end users face. Sometimes you create it a certain way and you think it's amazing or perfect, but when people actually use it, people who are not you, other users or visitors use it, they might find it problematic because they don't think the same way you do. So you have to find out what issues they're facing, what problems they're facing, and then fix the problems as fast as possible. Make sure your website is kept up to date. After you've uploaded your site, you're not done. Standards always change, and you have to make sure that you keep up to the standards. Again, if you use a CMS, regular updates will prevent you from bugs and decrease security risk. So this is a plus side of using a CMS. Anyways, here are my references, and that brings us to the end of our project life cycle. As I know it sounds like a lot, but don't worry, we'll go through each stage one at a time.